Hey, what up, y'all? Mr. Cruz here, the littest teacher you never had, back with another video. And this is actually part 2 of our EQ series. So if you haven't seen part 1 and you're a beginner and you're a newcomer to Reason, or just not Reason, but like music making and beat making in general, I would strongly recommend that you go back and watch part 1. It's super short, so it's not really too long. But in it, I go over the reason why we're going to be doing what we're doing today with EQ. If you just kind of want to get some more tips and more insight on EQ, then this will probably be a really good video for you to start on. Let's say if you've heard about EQ, you've done your research, you've done some experimenting, and you're still not getting it, or your mixes still aren't standing out and sounding clear, this will probably be a good video for you. You can bypass that first one. But if you do want to watch the first one, the link is going to be in the description below. So check that one out. All right, so what we're going to be doing is we're going to be taking what we talked about in our previous video and putting that into practice. So in the previous video, we talked about how EQ, in theory, can make your mixes sound better, and the reasons why that is. Remember, I talked about I showed you the Photoshop picture, the Photo-P picture, and how we kind of color-coded each of the bands and made sure that none of the colors were crossing into other bands, so that way we're not kind of clouding our mix or muddying our mix. That's kind of what we get the term, like a muddy mix, is because, it doesn't sound crisp, it doesn't sound clear, it doesn't sound clean. So what we're going to be doing is what I've already done is I've already set the levels for my instruments. I haven't put any EQ on it. Some of them might have like a little bit of reverb or a phaser, some effects on it. But I haven't done any kind of EQ, cutting, boosting, or none of that stuff. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to go through each one of my instruments, and I'm going to either put a high pass filter or a low pass filter on all of them. And I'm going to do some minor EQ tweaks. So one of the things that I want to tell you before we start out is, let's just listen to this beat first, and then I'll explain to you what my steps are going to be just by listening to the beat. All right, so let's take a listen. All right, so off the bat, one of the things I can tell is that it has a whole lot of low end. There's a lot going on in the low end, and it sounds muddy. So some of the other things, some of the other instruments kind of can't stand out because they're being crowded. Whatever frequency band, whatever frequency space that those instruments are taking up is crowded, and it just doesn't sound good. So what we're going to do is we're going to be cutting out, kind of trimming the fat, trimming a lot of the things that we don't need from those instruments. So I'm going to start out with my kick, and one of the first things that I want to do is I actually want to throw a high pass filter or a low cut filter on my kick. Now the reason I want to do that is because there are frequencies kind of below 40 hertz that are not that are inaudible to the human ear. So by cutting those, you're not really hurting yourself at all. However, as you can see over here, I have a synth bass. So my kick and my synth bass are going to be the stars of my low end. Any other instrument that has low end, I'm going to be filtering that out so that I make enough room for my kick and my synth bass to be able to share a place there. I don't know, kind of like they're moving in together, they're living their lives, and so that they can be there and they can have all the space that they need in order to stand out. One of the things though is what I had said is I'm going to be cutting out any of those frequencies from all of the other instruments because their low end is not going to stand out. What I want to stand out for as far as low end is the synth bass and the kick. So I cut out the 40 hertz, but I'm not going to do a cut here for the synth bass. And the reason being is even though you can't hear those frequencies that are kind of sort of below 40 hertz, kind of when you get into that realm, even though you can't hear it, you can feel it. So if the song plays in like a car with a good system, or you got your $200 Beat headphones on, or you're in a club and you're listening to it, you're going to be able to feel that bass. You might not necessarily be able to hear it, but you will definitely be able to feel it. All right, so let's go ahead and start out. So with my kick, all right, so I'm going to throw in an EQ, and with my low filter bell, I want to boost, or I want to find the area of the kick that really stands out, that has a lot of character, and I want to boost that part. So I'm going to do it by boosting here. That sounds bad, but I'm going to be sweeping my frequency back and forth so that I can hear where does that kick really stand out. All right, so I feel like right there really stands out. Even though you see it kind of peaking somewhere around over here, this part has a whole lot of character and a whole lot of punchiness, and that's what I want to stand out as far as the low end goes. So I'm gonna turn it down just a little. No, let's keep it like right there. And in case you didn't know, if you hold shift while you're moving your EQ bands, it'll stay on whatever axis it's on, whatever axis you're moving. So if I hit shift and I go left and right, it won't go up or down. If I hold shift and go up and down, it'll only go up and down. It won't go left and right. So that's me trying to move it left and right. It's kind of like jumping, but all right. So now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to start out by mixing, by EQing my kick and my low end, but I'm going to go down here and I'm going to hit filter EQ. And in case you didn't know, you can hit F2, right? To bring up like a hotkey to bring up the graphic EQ or this spectrum EQ. All right, I'm gonna go to my synth bass, and on my synth bass channel, I'm gonna right click and I'm gonna hit paste EQ settings. So now I've just copied what I had, the EQ moves that I made for my kick, and I copied it into my synth bass. The reason I did that is because I wanna take that same frequency that I boosted for my kick and I wanna cut it on my synth bass. Because that part of the kick I really want to stand out, and I don't want to have to compete with the synth bass. And on my synth bass, I'm not necessarily going to throw a low pass or a high pass filter on it. All right, and you saw me kind of boost it a little bit because it did kind of take out some of the level from that synth bass, but I do want that synth bass to share that space almost equally. I want the kick to stand out a little bit more, almost equally with my kick, and so I turned it up a little bit more so that we can kind of hear it more in the mix. All right, so now I'm going to go through the rest of my instruments, and I'm going to do the exact same thing. I'm just going to throw a high pass filter on almost everything, and we can kind of see here. There's a lot going on in that low end. So that low end was muddying and coloring up space that it didn't need to occupy. Because you hear that snare, it now sounds a lot snappier. Snappier, a word? Do the same thing here. Even though we really don't need to, because there's not a whole lot going on here with the hi-hat low end. Now, even though the tom does have a lot of low-end characteristics that do sound good, I'm really only looking for that, I'm going to call it snappy, whatever you want. That really snappy, pitchy kind of sound, really striky. I don't know. Look, yo, I teach math, okay? I teach math. I don't teach English. I don't know about putting words together and making things sound good like that, all right? But those frequencies, that's what I want to hear from the tom drums. I don't want to hear the low end. I just want that high end. Right. So we can kind of still get the feel of the tom drum without having the low end that was coloring everything else up. Like, I don't even need to listen to a cymbal to know that that's all high end. Same thing with the rim shot, but and I'm gonna cut some of the high end out just because we don't really need it in order for it to sound good. One of the things that I do sometimes is when I'm listening to something, especially if I'm kind of deciding whether or not I want to keep this sound in here or not, is I'll listen to it maybe for like wherever it plays. So if it's like a 4-measure loop, so if it's a 4-measure loop, I'll listen to it for those 4 measures, and then I'll mute it. And then if I mute it and I don't miss it, like if the beat still has the same feel, still has the same vibe, then I'll just delete it, because that obviously tells me that I don't need it. So I do the same thing when I'm EQing. I'll throw the high pass filter and a low pass filter on this rim shot, and I'll listen to it. And if it still gives me the same feel with this filter, with this frequency cut out, then I'll just leave that frequency out, because that means that I don't need it, and it leaves enough room and enough space for other instruments.
Coronavirus!
See, so that sounds good to me. So last thing is beatbox, and then we'll move on to our melodic instruments. That a little bit. All right, so now we're going to get started on our melodic instrument. So one of the things that I do want to do is I want to turn this up a bit more because I do want that to stand out more. So look, I already did an EQ move here. You notice that on this one I boosted wide. So one of the good rules of thumb is that when you're boosting, to boost wide, when you're cutting, to cut narrow, to have those bands be narrow, or have your Q be really high when you're cutting a frequency. Not super high, like you're not trying to make like surgical incisions. I do it enough to the point where like it sounds natural, so that the instrument doesn't have like phasey mechanical type of sound, if that's not what you're going for. Also going to throw the high pass filter on this. And just like I did with the kick, the reason that I picked this one, let's mute it or solo it so we can hear it. So just like I did with the kick, where I swept and then I found the frequency where that kick really stood out, I did the same thing with my melody, because when I'm making my beats, especially when it comes to mixing, I usually pick one instrument that I want to be the standout, right? That's the one that's going to be the star, that's going to shine above everything else. In this case, I picked this main piano melody here. So I also picked a frequency that I wanted to boost, because that's the characteristic of that instrument that I really want to stand out. Like, as far as that instrument being the star, this band or this frequency here is why it's the star. And so I want to boost that to make sure that when people listen to it, that they hear it, that it stands out. And what I'm also going to do is I'm going to do the same thing that I did with my kick, right, where I boosted and then I cut that from my synth bass. I'm going to do the same thing here. So I'm going to copy channel settings, filter and EQ. I'm going to do it with the strings. I'm not going to have to do it with the bass, right? I can do it with this one, even though this one kind of doesn't really need it. I'm going to do it with my bell. Actually, I don't know why I did that. So let's say this. All right, so on my string, now I'm going to narrow that Q, and then I'm going to cut it. So I'm going to hold shift and then drag it down to about 6 or 7 dB. So here's the reason why. So let's listen to the melody, and I'm going to cut out the frequency. All right. So then we can kind of A/B it so that you can see how when that part right there is boosted, it really stands out. It gives it a good vibe. Doesn't sound bad, but it sounds kind of flat. Tell me that's not the vibe right there. Tell me that's not the vibe right there. All right. So that's why I'm going to cut it out from all the other instruments. And I don't even need to listen to it. I don't have to. I don't want to listen to it. I can just kind of make this move and just know that when people listen to this beat, that creepy piano melody is going to stand out, because that's the vibe that I'm going for. So the thing that I didn't realize that I needed to do is, so I made the cut here. So this is the kind of, this is the EQ setting that I need to copy and paste on everything else, right? Because it has the cut in it already. All right, boom. All right, so I mean, at that point, I'm pretty much done. I didn't do the choir because the choir kind of plays during one specific part, so I didn't want to have to worry about it. And actually, just listening to it, I think I'm going to take this bell part out, because I don't think we need that bell. I don't think I'm going to miss it if I muted it. But anyways, that's what I got for you guys today. Hopefully, that's something that's helpful to you guys. Even if you, I would say this, because for me, EQing has been a struggle from day one. And still sometimes it's a struggle, because I battle with knowing what frequencies to cut out, like what do I want to stand out, and whatnot. So some of these things, some of these practices are things that I do constantly. And I would say that since I've done these things consistently and I've practiced at them, that my mixes have definitely gotten better. I would say much better, just by learning these few things that I do on all of my mixes, on all of my beats. But again, hopefully it's something that's helpful to you, and that's something that you can use and maybe clarified or gave you a little bit more confidence as far as moving into EQing stuff in the future. One of the things that you'll notice that I didn't really do is I didn't really cut out a whole lot of high end from my instruments. The reason being, again, because a lot of the vocals are probably going to sit around this range here, right? So one of the things that I will do before I bounce my whole beat is you can kind of see here that I kind of cut around 1K. Around that area, because that's typically where the vocals are going to sit. So by cutting that frequency out from the entire beat, that gives enough room for the vocals to sit nice and tight. All right, but anyways, that's what I got for you guys. Let me know in the comments below what you guys think. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. It's your boy, Mr. Cruz, out.